T-position hip throw, this is just kind of a default throw from T-position, kind of just a generic throw. And there's a lot of ways that people will do hip throw, a lot of variations. But I'll just show the one that I prefer. And the reason I prefer it is because I find that pretty much any body type can do it. So whether you're tall, short, big, petite, there are limitations and we'll talk about those, but for the most part, it's probably one of the main throws that works for most people. So I'll show it and we'll break it down here. Okay, so it's just a gentle, relatively simple and easy and effective throw. The main limitations that we have on this are going to be your height. If I am significantly shorter than my opponent, it's hard for me to lift their hips and feet up off the ground. So we'll just pretend that I'm like super short here and my hips are clear down here. If I step in, I'm just not tall enough to lift him up. But when you're tall like me, it's super easy to lift them up. So we're going to scoop under our opponent's hips and lift them. If your hips can only come so high, you can't really get his hips up as effectively. And there are things that you can do to help with that, and we'll talk about that. But just know, if there's a big disparity in height between you and your opponent, they're a lot taller than you, it's probably not going to work. That's the main thing that's going to shut this down. If you're really tall, you'll probably be able to get it on anybody. You just have to make sure that you're scooping really low and getting under their hips. So just for the sake of this move, we're going to start from T-position, but generally we're going to set up T-position from some type of closing the gap here. So we're going to have one underhook. My shoulder is in his armpit. I'm going to cup his tricep, pull his wrist into my armpit and pinch, okay? From here, sometimes we grab this too tightly that we can't complete the move. I need some space to be able to get my hips in front of his. And so if you have shorter arms and you're really latching onto this hip, it'll limit your ability to get the hips in front. So don't hug this hip so tight that your hips can't come in front. Sometimes we have to let this hand slip a little to get the hands in, okay? So again, if you're tall, you can hold on to the hip. If you're short, sometimes you gotta let it slip. In order to get the hips in front, it's a lot easier if I let this shoulder slip in. It puts me more in front of him to where I can more easily get my hips in, okay? So if this hand's too tight or I'm too tight here, it's gonna be difficult, okay? This is where I wanna be if he's resisting. If he's fighting, trying to pull away, I'm just gonna stay here until he calms down. Once he kind of stops resisting, I can go for the move. So shoulder's gonna come in. I'm going to open this foot. This foot's gonna circle in, and I want my heel just inside of his toe. If my foot doesn't go deep enough, I can't shoot the hips deep enough, and he'll kind of roll off when I try and lift. If I step in too far, I don't have a good base, and he can just pull me over backwards here, okay? So heel to toe, open, shoulder, heel to toe. My feet will be facing the same direction, shooting the hips. And when I lift, he should just drape right across my hips here. And I'm going to drive this arm to the mat. Tucking that shoulder towards the mat. So, again, based on how tall you are, can really affect a lot of stuff. It affects how well you can lift, and it affects how far you can reach your hips. If you have long legs, you can shift your hips farther side to side. So when I'm in this T position here and I've opened the foot, shoulder in, sometimes it feels a little hard to reach here. So you might need to step this foot in a little closer in order to reach, okay? So if you're having a hard time getting the heel to toe, don't leave this foot out so far that you can't reach and you end up feeling like you're doing the splits here. Sometimes if this foot's too tight though, it's hard to get in there and you feel like you're bent over backwards again. So learn what works for you. There's a distance here that's going to be ideal for you. And it's gonna vary a little bit based on anyone, okay? So get comfortable with that. My hips should be poking out the side here. You'll see my booty poke out over here. That's how far my hips need to go on this. If they're inside of his body and I pick him up, I run the risk of him slipping off the side here, okay? So if you watch, as I step in, I'm really shifting my weight over this foot to get that butt out. I'm going to scoop and lift, and then I can come back to neutral. So what that looks like here is I'm stepping in, shooting, squatting, lifting. Okay. So the last thing here is we really need to get under his hips. If I am too far away, I can't really scoop under his hips here. So what ends up happening is I'm trying to lift here on his stomach. Okay? So I need to scoop and back up to where my hips, my butt is on his thighs, and then I'm gonna lift there. Okay? So I'm really scooping my hips down, backing into his thighs, and then lifting up under his hips to get his feet off the mat. So without a body here, I'm in my T position, I'm opening the foot, poking the shoulder through, stepping in, shifting my weight to the side, and then I'm squatting and scooping with the butt, okay? So that's the movement there. And that'll take a little while to get down, but really it should be pretty effortless on this, okay? And when do we use this move? Really when the person is just kind of leaning forward slightly. If they're really upright, we'll use another move. If they're really bent over, we'll use a different move. And if they're pulling away from us, we'll use a different move. So they're kind of just standing there a little hunched over. So one little tip, if you have a really big opponent or a taller opponent, it helps lift their hips up off the mat better, and it helps with the final portion of completing the move. So if my opponent is significantly taller than me, sometimes I lift and I don't quite get him completely off the mat here. So one thing that can help is the more I tuck his head towards the mat, the more he'll pivot on my hips and it will pick his feet up off the mat. So without even lifting with my legs, I'm going to just tuck that arm here. And you can see what happens. So you can see I didn't lift with my hips at all. I can, but this helps as well. Okay, so when we put those together, it makes a really effective takedown. That's what you should be doing anyways, but you really have to emphasize that if your partner is a lot bigger. So a lot of times, if they're our size or smaller, we can just leave the hand down here and we don't really need it much. But anytime you bring that up here, it's going to be a lot more effective. And I like to just come on this side of his head and just point that right towards the mat. Okay, one other tip if your opponent is taller than you, if I step in here and my feet are wide, I can't lift my hips as high as if I bring my feet together. My hips can go maybe just a couple inches higher, and sometimes that's all we need in order to complete the movement. So when I'm here, I've gotten to this point and I can't quite get a lift here. By stepping this foot in, you'll be able to lift a little bit higher. It's not a huge difference, but it's just enough to compensate for some of that height disparity. Okay, so T position is going to be right here. Like I said, we have the hand on the hip, shoulders in the armpit, I'm cupping the tricep and pinching the wrist, okay? If he starts pulling away, we're going to do a different move here. If he's really vertical here, I'm going to do a different move. And if he's really hunched over, I'm going to do a different move as well. But the important thing here is that I keep my ear against his body, against his chest and shoulder until I'm ready to do the move. This hand is cupping the tricep and pinching the wrist. This is to protect against the punch, okay? He can't really punch me with this arm because my head is inside of the elbow, okay? If I bring the head away from the elbow and hang out here, there's room to strike. He can shove me away. He can do a whole number of things here, okay? If he really starts winding up with this arm, you'll probably lose control of it. And so we want to come over top here, 5 fingers in the bend of the elbow, and I'm gonna pin that to the body and grab the wrist. So we can set the T position hip throw up from here as well. I can clinch with the arm, I can cup the arm, grab the wrist, or for the traditional T position, there's this. I feel like this is the worst arm retention out of all of them. This is gonna be the best arm retention, but it's a little harder to work through the move, and I feel like this is somewhere in between.